Survivor's ready. Go!
Travis spoken.
Boston Rob and Amber are gonna do it.
This is a business trip, as I like to say.
You Brad Culpepper.
I'm tired of you and the fucking chicken.
You can call me the puppet master. They can be my little puppets.
It's not like you're making me deal with the devil here.
You get to milk your own milk, I guess.
We got enough rocks here, too. We could build a pretty decent shelter just using rocks.
I'm supposed to talk loud.
Direct from Hobart, it's time for the only Survivor podcast in Australia dedicated to Survivor. Bringing you today's interviews, episodes, and opinions from the greatest reality show on the planet. It's Survivor Oz, and here's your host.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Survivor Oz for our weekly recap of Season 32, Survivor Kaoh Rong. Cambodia, Brains versus Rong versus Beauty. They're running out of names for what to call this season right now. Let's just stick with Kaoh Rong, and as we've been doing every single week, almost successfully the entire season, we're bringing you past contestants to discuss the current season, get their opinions, and bring us a little bit of entertainment as well as opinions on their season as well and how it relates. And we're very happy to have a guest back here on the show who we're going to claim it right now. This is according to Ben. I didn't do the math, but he knows best. It is his show. The longest gap ever in between guests on Survivor Oz. Our guest this week was the third ever interview that was done back when this was not even called Survivor Oz. It was a segment on Ben's radio show. And this is her first time back on. And I'm very happy because my second favorite season of all time is Survivor Vanuatu. And as we're nearing the end, we have one of the final three here to discuss this with us. Scout Cloudley, welcome back to Survivor Oz for the first time in who knows how many years.
Well, thank you so much, Colin. Now listen, I have a question for you first.
Go for it.
What was your first favorite season?
My number one favorite of all time is Survivor Africa, Season 3.
Oh, yeah, great one.
Yeah, Vanuatu close behind that. So, and this season's worked out. You know, as I'm covering Ben for the recaps, I'm actually able to line up a lot of my favorites, people from seasons that I like. So I've had two from Africa, one from Vanuatu. Maybe we can keep this up and go for the rest of the season and just stack it with all my favorites.
Yes, that'd be great. Okay, good.
So why don't you just start off, I guess, before we even get into the current season. I did mention that Ben recently talked to you at Reality Rally, and you were there, and I guess a lot of the people we're having on right now just came from that, and that's where Ben is right now. So, for the listeners who maybe haven't heard, how did you first get involved with Reality Rally, and what was your experience like this year?
I first got involved when it first got involved. Yeah, it just came out. I thought it was a good cause. I was diagnosed with cancer and given a couple months to live back in 1990, and here I am. So it was one of those experiences and information you hear that's life-altering. At that moment, you have a choice. You can believe it and freak out, or you can say, well, if that's the truth, I'm ready to go. Now, what around me needs done, and at the time, the grass needed mowing, so I went home and mowed grass, and the rest is history. So it was interesting to me, and going back out again, we just got notified from Jillian, who said that they raised pretty close to $79,000, which is that's a pretty change. Yeah, 78 something. Yeah, so it's always good to be a part of that. You know, I was there in the beginning, and this was my third time going back, and seeing it grow and evolve is great. The first time I went, people didn't have to raise money to go, and it was an amount of money, pay your own way there. It's not something that you get paid to do. And so you're there because you believe in it and you want to be, and it was a lot of fun. All good. Met some wonderful people I didn't know before. Always enjoy seeing Richard Hatch again, and he was out there. And Bob and Peggy Crowley, love them. So yeah, I had a good time. It was good.
And I guess on top of that, where did your team? You actually participate in the event? Like you were on a team?
I was in a checkpoint.
Oh, okay. So yeah, you got to be a person who decided whether Ben could move on, or just decided to mess with him and hold him back a little bit.
yeah, but no, I wouldn't do that. It was good.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Reality Rally event, we hear so much about it every year, and it's funny because anybody who's talks to Jillian or has even heard from her knows that this is a year-round thing. So to get this right now and just tell people, like, already look forward to next year. Ben's talking about next year and everything. I mean, it seems like it's a great event. And is it something you're planning to go back to in the future? Have you made plans for that?
Well, we'll see. I'm headed out to Cincinnati for the Walk for Diabetes in a couple weeks, and I try to get to a couple every year. So we'll see how it goes. But yes, it's a year-round thing. In my opinion, I've been to a number of them in various places. I think the Reality Rally is kind of the Rolls-Royce.
Oh, yeah.
Reality event. It's really, well orchestrated, as you might guess. Jillian is quite the taskmaster and has the ability to put a wonderful team around her.
And you were part of the team.
Yeah, here we are. We're on the team.
Well, we can move on, I guess, talk a little bit about Survivor Kaoh Rong. I mean, this is the first time you've been on the show since Ben interviewed you, and I don't think we've ever really been able to hear your opinions on seasons that you've watched post-Vanuatu. But just with Kaoh Rong, how it's going so far up until this point, how are you enjoying the season?
Well, I'm really, really enjoying this season. Right after I came out of the show, I was blogging for the CBS stations here in Oklahoma and for newspapers. And so I had a completely different perspective as I'm blogging, taking notes. And now I've quit doing that a couple years ago because my work is insanely busy and wonderful. So now I just get in like anyone else and watch the show. And I am loving it. I love it's been great to have people to hate, but not really hate them. And then to turn and care about them. I'm personally, I'm enjoying watching the jury right now, enjoying them watching the contestants that are in the show. So I'm so happy. I was not a fan of Exile Island or Redemption Island, and I'm glad to go back to the basics like this show has done. I'm liking it a lot. I like Debbie. I didn't like her at first. Thought she was really annoying. Oh my gosh. Enjoyed it, and I enjoyed her being annoying. That's the point of her being on the show. But she turns out to be a really kind person, and and that's a nice turnaround. There actually is time on the various episodes to feel as though you get to know each of the contestants. And then, of course, we're lucky enough to be able to actually meet contestants as we go out on some of these events. I'm a fan of Ty right now. It's all over Facebook. I don't think people think that he has a chance, and I don't know that he has a chance. If people, there are people he's blindsided, and at the same time, if in the final analysis they really answer the question, who outlasted, his gaming is really exceptional, and he's gotten deep in my heart. So.
Well, what you said earlier, you kind of echoed what a lot of people have said about this season, both the contestants we've talked to as well as fans, and even us involved in the show. And that's this season seems to be very interesting. That it is almost polarizing. You have these characters that you hate and then you love, and you are seeing the good and bad of everybody. You mentioned even Ty, that people think he can't win, but then there's something so likable about him, and he's still playing an incredible game. This is definitely, I think, a transition season from what we're seeing, and I guess starting right off in the episode, Ty having gone against Scott in the previous episode, this was almost like his ascension to puppet master right at the beginning. And the first thing he wants to do is he says he wants to get rid of Michelle instead of Jason. Do you think that Ty was assuming the power position this week? Was that a little bit too premature, or do you think that could have hurt him?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm not sure. We never know how much it hurts because a lot goes on between now and then. But it was a little premature. But that makes the game interesting.
Yeah.
I think he had it wrapped up. He could use that double vote and make that happen.
I mean, whether it is like premature or not, I guess the interesting thing about Ty is, like you said, it is making good TV, and if he goes on and just ends up on in the final 2 or final 3, whatever it is, and has no votes, he's got to be the one character this season that's guaranteed himself a return spot on the show.
Oh yeah, absolutely, no question. Yeah, he's interesting. He's a great player, and he has seemed overly sweet up to the last few episodes, and he's brought himself forward, and he's taken a hold of the reins, and I love that. And he's deep. I love his depth, and I love his innocence at the same time.
Yeah.
Going forward and telling, I'm sorry I did this, or just telling his feelings. He's an interesting character. I wonder where they got him. Golly.
Yeah, you have to wonder with some of these characters, is this somebody that applied for the show? I don't know if Ty really strikes me as somebody who has watched the show from the beginning. Is this somebody recruited? And if he is recruited, like, did they walk by a garden one day and see this guy, whispering to the plants and the trees, and they're like, we have to get this guy on Survivor? I mean,
there are some people that have been cast just that way in various shows. Yeah. I don't know. I do know this about Survivor, because people ask me all the time that they give you a Survivor comes to the season with what they called a Bible or an agenda or an outline, and they have to stick to that outline. CBS legal team is out there making sure that they do that, so that no one can say, well, they bent the show this way for this contestant or that contestant. They pretty much stick to their guns on what they say they're going to do when they say they're going to do it, minus an earthquake that changes the schedule a little bit. But it's the real deal. They don't get out there and prime you to say certain things. The only real coaching that comes down from my experience with the show and, visiting with people is when they do the private interviews, which we call meditation, they want you to simply say, if they're going to talk about if they're going to talk about the jury, or they're going to talk about tribal, or they're going to talk about, an immunity event, they'll say, well, at the immunity this afternoon, they just want you to say, at immunity, blah, blah, blah. And that's the extent of coaching. And I do know, I know people that are programmers and assistants on other reality shows, and they sometimes reshoot a scene, to the effect. Well, Survivor does none of that. What people really have to understand is it truly is a social documentary. They cast for hell, they cast for conflict, they take you to hell, they treat you like hell, and then they document it. And that that gives me, when people, and I've heard a few people without mentioning names that said, well, I'm not that way, they cast me that way. But if it's on film, it's on film.
Yeah.
And if you see it on TV once, we saw it 100 times back at camp. So it's hard to get away from that, people saying they cast you to be a certain thing, or they edited you to be a certain thing. So I think about stuff like that with Ty, and going back to camp, after that event, and we get to see a little bit of what they do when they come back to camp, but we see so little of all of the interaction, although a camera's almost always with you, no matter what. If you're going 2 by 2 anyway, you typically have a camera on you. You quickly learn, if you're going to the bathroom or you want to, get naked and clean up a little bit, go by yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even then, cameras will follow you, because you can, as I did, leave notes on coconuts or wherever you could scratch something to someone to let them know who we're going to vote for, or, laying in a dark hut at night. They like to have those infrared cameras where they can look in there and see what's going on. Well, there's no question. We would, how as kids we used to draw on each other's backs or legs.
Oh, yeah.
Your finger. Well, that's what we're doing, trying to really strategize a little bit.
You're talking about almost like miming the words, you mean? Like oh, this is, I think I felt an S there.
That I would draw on your leg or on your arm or in the palm of your hand. the letter of the name of a person that I'm, going to vote out, or whatever the case may be. There's just a lot that goes on that the camera can't catch, although they're always there. It's a documentary. They want to catch that, and there's so many cameras on you because, particularly at tribal or any of the events, because if Colin and Scout are talking, and Ty over there raises his eyebrows and kind of tilts his head to the side, a camera has to catch that and has to tie it to the conversation that Colin and Scout are having. So there's you have a lot of cameras on each individual person just for that thing. One of the producers told me when we came out of Vanuatu, I was fascinated with the production team because they're unbelievable, lugging those heavy cameras and boom sticks and all the stuff they need through treacherous land, jumping over lava. It's pouring down rain. It's dark. I mean, they don't have a big flashlight guiding their way either. We're in the dark, and I saw several of the production teams several times crash and burn and really hurt themselves. And have to pick up and keep coming.
And try not to disturb whatever you guys are doing, I'm assuming, too, because then it's like, oh, we messed up the scene. They're going to miss some conversation because you're all of a sudden distracted.
Exactly. They're just masters of that. One of them told me that they dump, they're out on 3-day intervals. They'll be out there 3 days, do their filming bit. They're on 12-hour shifts typically. They can't take anything with them out on site during their time that has odor. A cigarette, gum, potato chips, anything that you could smell. So they're pretty limited in what they can eat out there. Maybe a health bar or something that smells bad and tastes bad, those kind of things. And they told me that they dump, and then they go back and they edit, and pull the storyline out while not revealing to you who it's going to be, right? And they told me that they dump about 300 times more footage on the editing floor than what we actually see.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and Steven Spielberg dumps 12 times more. It's an editing miracle, in my mind.
Well, the way that this season is going, like you even mentioned that we're seeing good and bad of people, and I'm sure you watched Worlds Apart like 2 seasons ago, right?
Yeah. Sure.
So on Worlds Apart, I think it reached several seasons where it almost felt like the characters were just becoming one-dimensional. Okay, well, like you said, you're going to edit it as the villain, and obviously Dan Foley, we talked to him a couple weeks ago, he's the guy who kind of voiced the concern and said they edited me this certain way, and then they had that footage that was left on the cutting room floor, and they said, well, here's the full version of it. But then this season, almost, I don't know if it's like you're into the production side and everything, you get that. I kind of am interested in the same thing. We're seeing a lot of these moments that otherwise would be cut out because they don't fit the character. Jason being a perfect example. Jason is portrayed as being this nasty saboteur, this bully, this villain, and then we have this nice stuff with him and his daughter. Do you think that the show is maybe trying to transition and show us different parts of these characters now that we haven't seen for a long time?
I think the show is using what actually comes up naturally. Jason, to begin with, he was coming off, like, a motorcycle guy or whatever it was.
Bounty hunter.
Yes. And as far as Dan Foley, I didn't like Dan Foley in the show, and I've met Dan, and he is a really sweet guy. And he is very loud.
Yes.
At times. Anywhere near a conversation, his voice and his action fills up the space. And even when the space doesn't have walls, he fills it up. And so that both parts of Dan are true. And I think I do. I'm a fan of the production team because I haven't yet seen a character that they cast in a certain way that in reality, when I've met them and hung out with them, isn't how they are. Basically, I can see where that editing came from.
If we talk about a character like Jason, he's been kind of up and down and everything. And I completely agree with you. You really are seeing both sides, like you said with Dan. it was really interesting because when I had Dan on for the recap, it was probably midnight for him. It was like, I think he was an hour ahead of me. So like 11 p.m. for me, I was tired. He had basically worked 2 jobs that day, as well as he manages his own apartment building. He's telling me all this stuff he does. And, he's telling me about how, he babysits all the kids in his apartment building. Like, he's the go-to friendly guy. And meanwhile, at the same time, you get this impression when you're talking to him. It's like, this is a pretty, like you said, loud guy. Some people may consider him abrasive, but then there's this soft side to him. And I think that we've seen a little bit of that with Jason. But I guess the real question here, and it really goes back to what Ty said during the reward challenge this week, where he was turning around a bit, and he, like I said, he wants to get rid of Michelle instead of Jason in this episode. He said he was warming up to Jason, and I wonder if Ty's warming up to Jason, and they really had a rocky couple of days there. Why is it that Ty thinks that the jury couldn't warm up to Jason? Like, do you think that Jason? Obviously, we know he didn't make it, but do you think somebody like Jason could have won over a jury at some point?
Yeah, I think he could have, and I think Jason. Everybody on the show, for the most part, grows into humility, because it's the real deal. You have people in your face 24/7, which is hard, even if you're wild about them. And the conditions are hard. You're cold, the food, all of it. Sleeping on bamboo, if you're lucky enough to have bamboo. The bug bites, which are treacherous this season, by the way. I had 4 rounds of antibiotics when I got out of that show, just to be able to have my knee replaced. The knee I went into the game with was too big, so I had it redone. But then coming out and just deworming. You can't be in an environment like that and not just pick up parasites.
And you came out, of your season, you came out as one of the ones where it's like, wow, she's fairly healthy. In comparison to what we're seeing this season.
Yeah, I lost a lot of weight, but I was healthy, and I don't know. Jason he wears humility well. I hope it sticks with him. And being willing to say that, coming up, being short, being not in a big alliance, and having to continue to figure it out. He's a fighter. I like that. I like the combination of his strength and his humility. I think he's going to be a person that's liked pretty well as we go around and visit.
Yeah, I actually do hope that his reputation turns around. I think that it's almost unfortunate that we're in this day and age where people don't really think the way you think. It's very clear you're the type of person that you will look for the best in anybody. If they're the nastiest person in the world, I'm assuming you probably look for the best in them. And unfortunately, fans, and maybe it is because we've come off of all these seasons where we do have, the storylines are, this is our clear-cut hero, this is our clear-cut villain. There's almost this rejection of people like Jason. Like, there have been people this season saying, like, Jason's a terrible human being. But it's like, well, look closely to it. And the interesting I've found is that of the last 4 recaps we've done, I believe, this is the 4th week in a row where the contestants who have been on the show have said, yeah, I think Jason's a lot better than people are actually giving him credit for. You guys being out there, I think, probably see something that the fans can't.
Yeah, a lot goes on behind the scenes. So, the camera's picking up all of the chatter and the conniving and the planning and that kind of thing. But there's so much that goes on in between that, and it's not always obvious when people are off planning like that because of the fact that you are out there, chop wood, carry water, make fire, find food. That is always going on. So I was glad Scott got out of there. Golly, I don't know. I was happy he got out of there.
Well, this was the first week where we really saw anything out of Joe, and I want to get your opinion on Joe here. I think obviously what happened this episode was he started to rub Sydney the wrong way, and it's something that you are obviously very familiar from in Vanuatu. It really had to do with just, the way he was maybe not necessarily dictating work, but saying this is something that should be done, and Sydney were not responding. So what's your take on Joe? Because we've really only seen, the only time we ever see Joe is where he's getting grumpy. So how do you feel about Joe on this season?
Well, I think he's way under the radar, for one thing. I think he's supposed to stay out there, being as old as he is. one of the things, of course, I was by far the oldest person on my season, 20 to 40 years older than everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But I worked really hard. You know, I didn't tell people what to do. I didn't boss people around. People would say, Scout, tell those girls, blah, 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 what to do. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll show them what to do. But I think, you know, Joe's tired. I think he's 71 years old, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
He's doing exceptionally well.
I mean, that's the age Rudy was in the first season. Like, people don't realize that we've been talking about for seasons after seasons. Like, how come we don't get anybody like Rudy anymore? Here we have a guy, and look what he's doing.
So we definitely have a guy like Rudy. He doesn't have the funny, you know, redneck kind of humor that a Navy SEAL had.
Mm-hmm.
That he turned around. Again, you know, we watch people change in this show. And, you know, that's always encouraging. Because Rudy, remember, he just wouldn't have anything to do with a gay guy, and at the end, you know, he and Richard were pretty good friends.
Yeah.
And Joe, I just think he had, you know, if Joe made it to the merge, which he did, I think he's not going to be a consideration until now in the game. There are bigger fish to fry. You know, once you get to the merge, you got to go after the people that are either strong or commanding the operation. They're loud, you know, like in our season, Sarge. We had to get rid of Sarge. He was very loud at camp.
Yeah.
People liked him, but he was so loud, and it's like, oh God, we got to get rid of that noise.
I mean, in all fairness, it was his job, but you got to imagine if you're out there, I mean, you're not hearing anything other than that. That's got to be a little bit annoying, huh?
Oh, horrible. Horrible. Rory in our season, and I'm sure there are things like this. Rory, I liked Rory a lot, you know, but when the camera came around, Lori, I mean, here would be Rory and I talking, and here comes the camera. Well, we've got to do such and such and so, and he'd raise his voice and get really loud. Man, annoying. And when you live with that and you're already tired and you're hungry and always dehydrated, no matter what, you're always dehydrated.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, trying to hold your thoughts together, which is hard to do when you're dehydrated, it can be really annoying.
Mm-hmm.
But I figured when Joe made it to the merge, he was going to be a non-plussed player until now. And now people begin to say the inevitable. Joe would be a great person to take to the final three or final whatever they do. He'd be great because he has basically been pretty nonplussed in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I mean, you pretty much confirmed like what I was saying. I think in a way, maybe it is a bit of his age. I mean, you can only do so much when you're 70 plus on Survivor. Yeah. And on top of that, I think, you know, he comes from a different generation with a different work ethic. And it's not to say that, you know, he was bossing Sydney around or anything, but these are two generations that are going to see things completely differently. I almost do wonder, though, like you were saying, Joe's pretty much a non-factor. Who's going to look to vote out the guy who's not really in the game? In the episodes where he has been playing the game, he's refused to vote with everybody else. So it's almost like, okay, he has no shot of winning. The players have to see that. They want to take him in the end. But is this going to be, you know, a season where somebody gets the chance to do that with Joe? If you're out there, is Joe the type of person you want to sit next to in the end?
Oh, boy, taking a look at those people, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe. Of course, Joe and I'd be in the same boat because we both were older participants, and I think Joe's playing a pretty good social game. You just mentioned Sydney, which triggers me to say I've been Sydney's fan.
Oh, yeah.
Up until this last couple episodes, she started to show me some attitude. Anybody show me attitude that they're not willing to work, or any kind slight entitlement? You know that. Of course, we saw it.
Yeah.
On camera because that happened in private interviews. You don't see it so. They probably are not seeing it so much in camp.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a tough competitor.
Well, that's another thing to bring up, like with Sydney. I mean, Sydney has been my favorite the whole season. I think she's been a little bit more absent in the last couple of weeks, and I think another thing, like you said, she's tough. I think people forget, you know, she probably came into this as the number one physical target. I mean, she's a bodybuilder. Who wouldn't target the bodybuilder when it gets to individual immunities? But this was the first week where she actually won a challenge. And on top of that, like you also brought up, there's a difference between when you're just talking a confessional to the camera and when you're talking around camp. And a lot of that attitude she has had, it hasn't been to people's faces. So has she burnt people on the jury? Like, what do you think Sydney's chances are if she can make it to the end of this game?
I think they're pretty good. I mean, I realize that we're getting it, and they're probably not getting it so much in camp.
Mm-hmm.
Sydney and Ty have been favorites of mine from the get-go. And Sydney, I wouldn't have wanted to get rid of her up front because you need that kind of strength until the merge, and then the merge you might want to dump it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, there's just been bigger fish to fry as they're plucking people out at this point. She's managed to maintain alliance, which is really important. I think that people ask me for personal advice, and you got to have an alliance. You know, I'm a team builder in life, a corporate coach and a team coach, and being on Survivor is like being in a damn foxhole.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't have to like each other. In fact, you don't like each other for the most part. At least I didn't. But you do have to love each other. You do have to take care of each other. You do have to try to get food for each other and win those challenges and, you know, bring something to the table for the good of the group. You know, in a foxhole, you're just trying to survive together. And that's very real in Survivor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another thing about Alliance, you just mentioned, it's a perfect transition because the next thing I wanted to talk about was the fact that this is more and more looking like it could potentially be not only a female winner of Survivor, but maybe an all-female alliance that makes it to the end or close to that. And a lot of fans talked about it all season, I guess for two reasons. The first being a more humorous thing. I don't necessarily believe it, but, you know, kind of a funny thing that a lot of people bring up, that Jeff Probst, his favorite seasons are usually the ones where alpha males win, and he wasn't that high on this season going into it, so people are like, okay, that means a woman's going to win Survivor. But secondly, that we had a lot of mentions, you know, with Debbie. Debbie said several times, I want a woman to win this. You know, we have you know, Aubrey and Sydney and Michelle, and it really was for a while there men versus women, even though the season wasn't designed that way. This season, it seems like it's working out. Now, in your season, I remember at the time, like my second favorite season of all time. I've seen it so many times. I've analyzed the season, but it was probably, I would still say to this day, up until Chris was let by 1 week, probably the single strongest alliance in the history of Survivor. Maybe, I don't know if any alliances since then have been stronger to the point that the all-female alliance you guys had was. Having said that, you know, obviously it didn't work out in the end. From your perspective, what do you think is different with what the women in Kaoh Rong are doing versus maybe what, you know, you and Eliza and Twyla and everybody did and Julie in Vanuatu?
Well, first of all, back in Vanuatu, you do get to the point in the game that anytime there is a betrayal, that person has to go.
Yeah.
Even if they're in the alliance, and that came about with us. You know, a betrayal with Leanne and then Amy. So we had to move those two out of there. The good thing about Eliza, and for me, you know, Eliza was an annoying little person out there constantly. But she couldn't tell a lie. You know, Eliza and her mother have this pure little heart, and even though she talks like, I mean, it is like, if we just like, you know, it made me hate the word like. But she was a person that I could trust because she had a purity about her. So, and Chris, you know, he came into the alliance because he needed to. He was lucky to get there, and he stuck with it, to his credit. And I stuck with my original alliance, Twyla, all the way to the end of the game. Right now, I thought Debbie had a great idea. I thought they were going to pull off a female alliance, and I'm not saying that they won't pull off something like that. Aubrey is a person I started out not liking so much, and I like her a lot now. So I love those kind of changes happening. I love being, people surprising me into being something better than I first thought.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they surprise me into being worse than I first thought. And it's not that Ty is worse right now, but it's nice to see him, macho up. He's cowboyed up a couple times.
No kidding. I mean, his immunity and his challenge performance, for one, that's insane.
Yeah. And he does it with such dignity and aplomb and sweetness.
Mm-hmm.
All of those characteristics are just, amazing. I don't know. I don't know if we're going to have a female alliance. I thought Debbie had a good thing going.
I mean, it's funny because the fans at this point are sort of jokingly looking at the alliances going on and saying the girls and Joe, because he really is the tag-along guy. But
yeah.
it has been them calling the shots for this season, I think, very much like a season like Vanuatu. I mean, again, you would be the expert, you would know, but I think one thing that maybe has been different on this season compared to what we saw in Vanuatu, One World would be another one. A lot of these seasons where even if it isn't the show designing saying it's going to be men versus women, it seems like every year we have something come up saying, oh, there's going to be an all-men's alliance. We got to watch out for that. Oh, then it's like, oh, the women are going to have an all-women's alliance. We have to watch out for that. It seems like this time is a little bit more natural, and it's not, you don't draw the line in the sand, because if you do that, you make people like Rory, you mentioned, must have made him really nervous. Like, obviously we saw on camera, made him really nervous. And I think one of the things that's been done differently, especially since, Debbie has been voted out, is that they're saying, we'll find a way to work with Ty if we have to. We'll find a way to work with, not Jason. I was about to say work with Jason. That wasn't happening. But find a way to work with Joe. But in the end, it really is like Aubrey, Sydney, Michelle, and I think they are dedicated. They want to see, we're not hearing it on camera, but I feel like that the game plan here is to try to have an all-female Final Three if they can.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's going to happen. I think so. And Joe's a vote. Hello.
Yeah.
He doesn't resist much, and of course he has voted differently than others. But sometimes I think that's because he's not in the loop.
Mm-hmm.
Intentionally.
And we saw the same thing you were saying too about like with Leanne and Amy. When you have betrayal, you cut that out, and that may be the other thing that they're really doing right at this time. They saw Julia as, well, this isn't going to go well. Let's cut her out now, and. I think they're starting to look at Ty the same way too. Really, this entire episode came down to the fact that Ty wanted to get rid of Michelle instead of Jason. I really want to get your opinion on Michelle too, because Michelle has been one that's been hard. I've been asking every contestant we've had on for the last couple of weeks about Michelle, because I have a hard time wrapping my head around Michelle. A lot of this, again, is how the fan community has changed, and I think trying to analyze the edits, people are getting confused in a season like this, and they're like, well, we haven't seen anything bad with Michelle, so she must be the winner. But what do you feel Michelle's chances are to potentially win this game, and how do you feel she's playing, and do you like her at all?
She's nonplussed to me as well. I don't dislike her a lot. I don't like her a lot. She's obvious. She's in the game, so she's not... she's not under the radar. I don't think she has a chance of winning it, and that's just, I think people that if I were to pick out a person who's a gamer it'd be Aubrey.
Yeah.
And she's called some shots. She's stuck with it. She's bright. She's sensitive. I love seeing that about her. If she gets to the final, whatever it is, I think she's got a shot. If Ty gets there, I think he's got a shot. And Sydney, that's kind of where I am. Those three, if they get up there, I think they've got a shot. I don't see Michelle as doing it, but she could surprise me.
Well, I mean, I'm for any of the listeners on this show, they're going to feel like I'm sounding like a broken record at this point, but I've been saying for weeks that it seems like the players in the game are not seeing what we're seeing with Michelle, because we hear Ty, and he's saying, well, Michelle hasn't betrayed anybody in the jury, and I'm thinking, like, well, except for Nick and Debbie, the first two members of the jury, and then he says like, Michelle is more of a threat than Jason is and everything, and, we have to get rid of Michelle, and even this week, Michelle, as soon as the immunity challenge ended, she basically made a comment on camera saying, yeah, I feel safe, and she had no clue that she was being gunned for, so... I'm in agreements with you that I don't think that Michelle really necessarily has her head in the game enough to win this thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think so either. She's not the person that is, Aubrey is definitely a gamer. Loved that. Ty is.
Even Julia, I think, maybe more so than Michelle was. No, not necessarily playing the right game, but yeah, she was definitely playing a little bit harder.
Yeah, she was.
With the one thing I want to talk about again, and this is coming up more. I wrote an article for the site this past week, so I want to get your opinion on this. But the reward challenge, particularly that we're seeing something we haven't seen in a long time with the reward challenge, which is experiencing a bit of the culture with the animal sanctuary and everything. So are you a fan of reward challenges, or do you prefer it where they combine the challenges and maybe we have a little bit of extra screen time for character development or strategy or whatever else? Or do you really like having the rewards in there?
Yeah, I like them. I like the balance. I like them there sometimes, and sometimes, combining. I definitely love having the culture brought into as much as possible. When we were out there, I met up with a person from one of the natives in Vanuatu, and we exchanged Christmas cards every year, and sometimes right in between. That whole family and his children, and send pictures back and forth. That was pretty wonderful for me. The camera didn't know that, and that's okay.
Was this I can't remember the name, but the character who actually came to your camp and everything, what was his name?
Da.
Yeah, was that who you're talking about?
No.
Oh, okay. This is like a fan's dream. If you and Da, you're exchanging Christmas cards every year. That's like fan sequel, blow your mind.
No, but actually the 37th day of the game, you had to walk so far to get ironwood. You needed ironwood, hardwood. Bamboo just burns immediately, and keeping that fire going in the middle, it rained 30 to 38 days, so it's wet. So, I was out walking alone, you had to walk a long way to get a little bit of firewood, and I met a guy and his wife out on the trail. They came out to check their gardens. They had gardens out in those jungles. And, what am nam you? What's your name? And so I ended up leaving my address etched into a coconut.
Your secret messages continue on.
Yeah, and he left. He actually brought back his address written on paper, which he could do, and left it where my coconut had been. So, we exchanged addresses that way. We just met on the trail and have been in touch ever since.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, really cool.
It's nice to think that maybe Jason is going to be in touch with the monkey that was jumping and attacking him.
I don't know.
Monkey handler or something like that. Yeah. I like these culture awards. It's just, it came in a bad week for me because I wrote an article about how we could do away with reward challenges. And I said as an exception in there, it's nice to have these cultural things, but do we need to see this every week? But I really, was reminded of the classic seasons with this. And it's something that, maybe we get a little of it every year, but let's be honest, for the most part, the rewards are just, here's some hot dogs, here's some hamburgers, and this week it's like, well, let's let you actually see what's different about this culture, and it probably has been a long time since we've seen one this good.
What you don't see at all those reward challenges when they're separated like that, the camera does not so much show you the planning and what goes back on at camp. I mean, those games have turned as a result of time apart from each other.
Yeah.
I never won any of them, so I don't know. I was always the one back when they were off, drinking and eating and carry on wildly with the natives. I'm back trying to keep the stupid fire going at camp.
Yeah, when Julie's off at her picnic in the volcano or whatever, she didn't get like a pen pal for life out of it. So I think you come out the winner ultimately.
Yeah, I think so. We've got a good pen pal, a good friendship going. But, Julie and I set up that night. Neither one of us got to go on that thing, and we set up and we burned everything in camp we could to keep the fire going. Yeah. And silly, we thought we were pretty funny. So I'm such a fan of John Kerfoffer and his dream team and the stuff that they come up with. So for me, it's kind of nice to see the variety of challenges that come about when you do keep a reward challenge in there. I've that so. But like you, I like to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, if we can get away from just a couple of the barbecues. I mean, again, I'm coming off of watching an entire season where my wife, I've been mentioning every week, she's pregnant. So every week where we have, well, she's no longer pregnant. We had the baby now, but she has been pregnant the whole season. So when it's the ice cream reward and everybody online the next day is complaining, saying, oh, we just saw people lick ice cream cones. Meanwhile, she made me rewind it 3 or 4 times. So maybe I'm just getting a little sick of watching these food ones over and over again. It's nice to see some monkeys.
I got the whole food thing out there anyway, because young people, that's all they talk about, sex, food, and music.
Yeah.
Really boring. Yeah. What'd you name your baby, by the way?
We named him Casper.
Casper?
Yeah.
Like Casper the Friendly Ghost
Exactly.
of old?
Exactly. Not named after the Casper the Friendly Ghost, but that name, yes.
Oh my good! What a wonderful name! Yay!
Yeah, I like it too. He'll be on Survivor Oz one of these days. Probably crying in the background, but he'll be a star on the show.
You get my dog barking. What the cameras I wish they would pick up instead of people licking ice cream is I wish they would pick up the people back at camp who are strategizing wildly.
Yeah, because it's almost become. It's become a situation where going on a reward, depending on who's going with you, if the larger group is going to be back at camp, that's more of the advantage for you, is to actually be there, to be at camp instead of being on the reward. Yes, and yes.
Yeah, their strategy, the times they get to pick somebody to go with them, their strategy in that selection.
Yeah, which we really haven't seen as much of, and I think that's, I believe it was not Blood versus Water, San Juan del Sur was the season where people kept giving up their challenges and stuff like that, and I think it reached the point maybe where the show realized this is broken, we need to start separating them into groups before, let's pick teams instead of having people pick, because it got to the point where there was so much strategy involved in taking somebody that just wasn't working anymore.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I want to move on to the tribal council here really quickly and really talk about 2 people, Ty and Jason. That's what it was about. There was the mentions of getting rid of Michelle, and really there was no jeopardy of that happening this week. But I saw a big difference between what Ty presented and what Jason presented. You mentioned at the beginning that Ty has some flaws in his game, and I think the biggest flaw, and the reason that I'm leaning towards that maybe he won't win this game, is that he's not a talker. And you came from a season where Chris won. I mean, you were there, but from what I saw on TV, arguably Chris won because he may be the smoothest talker in the history of Survivor. Versus Ty.
BSer.
What's that?
BS.
Sorry, what was that?
The best BSer.
Yeah, talker quotations. But I mean, that really was his strength. I'm sure you'd agree with that. And Ty is kind of the opposite, where he's always seems to be putting his foot in his mouth at Tribal Council. Like this week, where he was talking about, I wanted to get Sydney alone, and it's like, why are you getting Sydney alone? Aren't we all supposed to be an alliance? Just a couple of weeks ago we saw him mention the super idol when he wasn't supposed to. Then this week that comes up again. He's like, well, my advantage may or may not be this. Like, do you think that if Ty, do you think Ty actually has the ability in him to convince a jury of something from what we've seen? And at the same time, if Ty is going to the end, who does he need to sit next to where maybe his lack of people skills and his lack of BSing could actually win him the game?
Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe, just because Joe's a little nonplussed. But yeah, that's what I think. The other ones...
it would be dangerous.
I want to ask you a question about Tribal.
Yeah, for sure.
How do you like the revelation that, and it's been the last, 4 or 5 seasons where Jeff is really making a lot of revelations in Tribal. He's always had the ability because he comes back and looks at those 3-day sections. So he's teed up pretty much about what's happening, but now he's running his mouth about it. How do you like that?
I mean, in a way it helps, I think, to tell the story.
Yeah.
Whatever the story they want to present to us that week. I mean, Jeff is involved enough in the show. I think that's the main reason we're seeing it. He's involved enough in the show that by the time they get to Tribal, he knows, okay, this is what this episode's going to be about before we even look at the footage. But at the same time, I mean, I do miss the days where he would be at Tribal and he was just talking at, there was no leading on, because I think sometimes maybe the players start to catch on to what Jeff says, and we're seeing a lot of that this year. When Jeff's asking a question, everybody's whispering up behind him, and I actually wonder if that's the reason why. If people are clued in, well, Jeff's asking Michelle this question, we're missing something, let's start strategizing again.
Yeah, and actually, in our seasons, which has been a while back, but we weren't allowed to do that, to whisper back and forth, nor whenever, when Jeff got to go count the votes, and somebody may have had, well, I don't think they had an immunity back then, but we sat there in silence in the rain, and he's gone sometimes for an hour or more.
I meant to ask that the last couple of weeks, and it kept slipping my mind about the fact that we're seeing so much talking at Tribal. So that's something that's new from what your experience was compared to now.
Yeah, right, and they're letting that happen. So that that's interesting to me. Yeah, Jeff's gone quite a long time. They're changing out cameras and film and all that stuff.
And probably also like stacking, okay, well, what order are we going to read these votes in? It's not really, we're not looking at the votes. It's what order are we going to present them in?
Pretty much, yes, when he does the order, back and forth, fourth, next person voted out is. I mean, you got a pretty good read of who's going. I'll tell you the other thing, and I think it's still playing out, is you get a pretty good idea of who's going because they get a lot of airtime in the show that week.
Yeah.
A person that doesn't get airtime doesn't get voted off the show.
And if they do, all the fans are complaining that was the worst episode ever. Why was this person voted out?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this was obviously Jason's episode. We saw a lot of him. We saw probably less of him strategizing than past weeks, because really I think, I don't know, this is just my perspective, I think that Jason closed off after last week, where we definitely saw it because Ty approached him and said, let's change the game up. And in the end, Jason didn't even vote with Ty. It's almost sad on Jason's part. Like, if this had come down to one more vote, let's say Ty had convinced one more person to vote along with him, then this vote could have been very different. But the fact that Jason didn't vote with Ty, I mean, Jason could have almost voted himself out of this game because he just threw a vote at Joe. So, I mean, without having seen all the reasons before, do you have any theories as to why Jason suddenly just didn't even go for somebody who was actually trying to help him in the game?
Yeah, I don't think he trusted him. I think he came in late to that little group, and that's what I think. I think he didn't trust him. So, what do you think?
No, I mean, I agree with you. I think that he did lose trust in Ty, and I think this is another area where maybe if Ty does lose this game, Ty is going to be the type of person who's born for second chances because he has made these potentially game-ending mistakes. And last week, I think that Jason would have been open to anybody working with him. And this week, it's almost like he's like, you know what, it's just not happening. And it's almost sad that it could have worked for him this week. I wonder if Jason had gone along with what Ty was saying, if he had trusted him. Ty's not a good talker, Jason is. Could Jason have talked another vote out of somebody and maybe turned this game around? It's really interesting to speculate what could have happened this week had he trusted Ty enough to go with this.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing from experience is you get out of the game, you rethink, you replay, this game has been life-altering for a lot of people, and it has created, I've talked with a number of people who felt like their life, was ruined in a sense because of Survivor. Of course, others, it's been an enhancement for them. I'm a motivational speaker. Prior to going into the game, and certainly coming out of the game, have continued to do that part. Of course, people now call me Scout and not Dr. Lee, and they are very interested in strategy of the game. Before going in, I would give keynote speeches. Now I give an introduction and do Q&As because you can teach and share a lot of strategy through a Q&A. So that's it, totally changed up my style, and I like it so much better. I love being led by an audience versus being there to, deliver great wisdoms.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, obviously, you said it, you have regrets, and I think every person we've talked to on these recaps of season has said the same thing. Oh, I still think to this day, what if I had done this differently? And, people saying it like monopolized their thoughts for weeks afterwards. So we're reaching that point in the game where everybody is so close. And, you said it earlier, you just missed out. You were this close. If it had been a final 3, we would right now be talking to the winner of Vanuatu most likely. So,
I mean, that could have happened.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? At that point, I never went in the game to win money.
Mm-hmm.
I went in the game because I was doing ropes courses and that kind of event when Mark was 9 years old riding a bicycle. So, whenever the game came on, I had worked with corporations using ropes courses and those kind of challenge things for a long time,
mm-hmm.
and they called me. So I tuned in the third episode of the first season, and of course have not missed any since. And I guess one of the things I think back on, and I can't really talk myself into re-entering the game for money because it was not my motivation. I felt like I knew physically, I was a very strong athlete as a young woman, but as an older woman coming in with an artificial leg, I knew that wasn't going to be my game, but I knew my psychological and social game would be strong. And I look back, and I can't really talk myself into thinking about going in to make the money. It doesn't feel like me. And I remember the walk I took before we went into that final challenge. It was a almost spiritual experience for me. I was satisfied. I was obviously drained and full all at the same time. So I don't have any regrets really as I look back, but I do look back, and you think about strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I know I went into the game and I was going to do the best I could by being integrous, and I think I held true to that. It's funny to me, people come out and they think that lying and cheating is all part of the game, and it is for a lot of people, but it doesn't need to be.
Mm-hmm.
You look at Tom, the fireman, and Bob Crawley, and, there are a number of people that have won the game or done very well in the game that were such amazingly good people.
Mm-hmm. Ethan?
Decent,
mm-hmm.
Yes. Avoided lying and cheating, and, I think everybody, just by omission, there's things you don't say.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think I learned and have probably carried into the game, but I certainly got stronger at it. I've got a lot less hills to die on than I ever did as a young person.
Mm-hmm.
There's some things it's just shut up, don't say anything. My greatest skill is keeping my mouth shut. So there's a number of examples of that, for all of us that have played the game.
Yeah.
That's amazing to me, some of the stuff they do say at Tribal. It's like, oh, God, I wouldn't have said that. You idiot.
Uh-huh.
Anyway.
I do have to ask one tribal question about yours, not one you experienced, but if you had gone, you didn't have the chance to have a regret about this, but if you had gone to the final 2 against Chris, and it wasn't Twyla, it was you, would you have ever brought up something like, why should you win Survivor? Hey, I can walk a balance beam, this guy can't. Would you have gone there with Chris?
No.
That's a bragging point for you, to be able to say, hey, look what I did.
I would have, I held to Twyla, the alliance with her right to the end. However, when I went into Tribal that night to vote, and I heard all of the lying that Chris had done from the other jury members,
mm-hmm.
I changed my mind.
Yeah.
I was going to vote for him because Chris started out weak and got strong.
Yeah.
And Twyla started out strong and got weak. And Twyla was, she was in the foxhole with me, so I stuck with her, but she was annoying and she had a lot of migraine headaches. She was coming off of a 2 or 3 pack a day chain smoking
mm-hmm.
into Survivor. And there were moments that were really hard for her. I'm not sure I would have gone there with Chris. And I did not know if I'd have been sitting with him there at the jury. It would depend on what the jury people say. Mm-hmm. I admired Chris because he had plenty of opportunity because Twyla and Julie got naked out there on the show with them. And, of course, Julie, wonderful, sweet Julie, flirted with everything that moved, men and women both. And Chris held true to his love of Lori.
Yeah.
He does now, and I admired him a great deal for that.
Yeah, but he even still lied to her, on camera. The guy lied to everybody.
He did. Oh yeah, he did. The lying part, that wasn't where my good feelings about Chris came. I helped Chris stay in the game.
Yeah.
Early on, and I just admired him because he didn't get into that whole scene. He was there to play the game. Oh yeah, he lied to everybody.
Well,
and he may have lied to me too, but I never discovered that.
Yeah.
He didn't like it that I called him a BSer. That's okay.
Still to this day.
Still to this day. I'll see him in a couple weeks, so it'll be fun to go over that.
We're going to move on to our final set of questions here.
Okay.
Call it Final Five, but there's a bonus one on there that we'll get to.
Okay.
So first off, most appropriately, we're 3 episodes away from the end here. Who's your tip to win Survivor Kaoh?
Oh boy, right now Aubrey.
Mm-hmm.
A heck of a game. Probably Aubrey.
So then, who would you pick number 2 as your dark horse?
A dark horse, I still go with Ty.
Mm-hmm.
But again. Sydney, she's a gamer.
I mean, yeah, you said those 3 names earlier, and I think for a long time we've been speculating on this show, who can we see as being out of it? Who does not really have a chance based on what we've seen? And it seems so hard to imagine Michelle or Joe actually winning this season. I think those 3, it really is down to those 3, as you said.
Yeah, unless they were to miraculously win a final challenges or something.
Yeah.
I see Sydney giving great speeches at Tribal. I think Aubrey would. She may be annoying, but I think she'd be amazing doing that. And Ty, in his inimitable way, could be endearing.
It's almost great. Like, again, coming off of this episode, when Ty puts his foot in his mouth, I just love the guy more for some reason. I think that's the type of player I like. I like to see people who struggle a little bit.
Well, bless his heart, I don't even think he struggles. He's just childlike.
Yeah.
He's so childlike and innocent in certain ways. So I'm going to say, putting it out there, I think the final 3 are going to be Aubrey, Sydney, and Ty, and Aubrey will probably win it. We'll see.
So then we've pretty much narrowed down those who can't win the game. So then our third question, I'm interested to see what you respond on this one. Who do you think is going to be the next one to go?
Michelle.
Yeah. You think it's just going to catch up with her? Like, obviously Jason was planting the seed. Michelle could win this, or will it just come down to, well, she's the least threatening out of the 2?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's almost like choices are limited at this point. Now you have to think, it's like, well, Michelle and Joe aren't winning the game, so which one's going to be targeted first?
Yeah. So, I don't think, Joe, I'd want to go to the jury with Joe if I possibly could, because of, he's so non-threatening.
And Ty still has, his immunity he can use this week too.
And everybody knows that, so he could play that. And then they would be vying to get somebody else out because they'll have to split the vote. Yeah, I'm not really sure, Colin, at this point.
I think that's pretty accurate, though. Like, we have our power rankings that we do every week where there's 4 of us that just rank all the contestants, and I haven't finished mine this week, but I think that your answers here are persuading my power rankings because, like you said, people are going to want to take Joe. I don't think you're going to break Aubrey and Sydney up. They're the 2 power players. Ty's safe for a week. Who else is there? It really has to be Michelle as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, exactly.
So this one, I'm really interested to see what you answer. On this season, who's the player that is most like you?
Hardworking, under the radar. You hate to say Joe, because in some ways, yes.
You're going to go with Joe?
No. Well, he came to mind first, so let me not overthink it. None of the young people.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's things about Jason that I know in my heart to be true. I don't think it came out in the show.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, we'll stick with Joe then.
Who do you think? Who do you think is most like me? Good question.
You know, I think as far as the personality goes, there's a lot of similarities with Ty, just in like the positivity and everything.
Right.
And also just the trust in people and everything. There's similarities to Ty, but I think you definitely had a more level head and probably the stronger work ethic like Joe. So I would say a cross between the two, to be honest.
Yeah, that could work. Thank you.
There you go.
You get points for that gold stars.
All right.
Right at.
And if one of them wins, then it's like this is meant to be. You are meant to be back on Survivor.
No, I'm not going back on Survivor. I have mouth about so many people when I was doing the blog, probably just like you.
Yeah.
No.
Now,
when you're blogging or doing the show like you are, you can say the stuff that you wouldn't say. Well, most people wouldn't say out there.
Yeah, exactly. Now, our last question here, there's a spin-off answer, but I'll go with the simple one first. So this season has been Brains versus Brawn versus Beauty. So if that's what your season was, or if you were on this season, which of those three tribes would you have ended up on?
I probably would have been on the Brains.
Yeah, that's the most common answer we get on here.
Yeah, but Brawn is a young woman. I could outrun anybody out doing. I was such a incredible athlete. I won scholarships, a whole bunch of stuff. But I'm older when I got on the show. So,
but you know what? Every person we've had on here that said, I wouldn't fit in the Brawn, I always remind them, Alicia was on the Brawn tribe this year. And I think probably even at this age, you're maybe a little bit more physically fit than Alicia was.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, then here's the spin-off question for this. So, it being a Brains versus Brawn versus Beauty season, based on your season Vanuatu, if you were to pick the ultimate Brain, the ultimate Brawn, and the ultimate Beauty, who would those people be from Vanuatu?
The ultimate Brain, I know I had a high intellect of everybody there. Mm-hmm. The ultimate Brawn, Sarge, ultimately, he was really powerful for his age. Mm-hmm. And Beauty, Julie, no question. She's one of the most beautiful women that ever walked the planet, still is. And fun. Lord God, the woman is fun.
You know what? You have to get extra points, too, because there's no rule against it, but you're the first person who's been willing to answer themselves for one of the questions. And I'm thinking, if I was ever on Survivor, I'd be like, I don't think you have any right to be on Survivor unless you believe you are, the ultimate Brain, because you don't go on the show unless you think that you have potential to have what it takes to win.
Well, I knew what my IQ. They put you through all kind of tests, Colin. You go out there for 2 weeks and take MMPI and intelligence test and emotional test and God knows what, And what they're looking for, I am now told, or was told afterward, they're looking for a murderer.
Oh, really?
They don't want it to default into being a murderer out there because the stress is that bad. So I passed the test. I'm not a murderer.
Was this the same test that was given to Brandon Hance a couple of seasons ago? Because I don't know if their standards changed or something. It came pretty close with him, I think.
Yeah, I think they did. Sue, was it Sue that pushed Sue? She's pretty...
yeah.
There was an incident where people got into it. I can't remember the guys now.
Richard and Susan, I think it was. There was, on All Stars, there was an incident with that, yeah.
She left the game, which was so weenie. I hate that. Oh, I know I'm intelligent.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah. Well, and again, we have your predictions. So the next time you're on this show, we can go back and we can say you were on Kaoh, and Aubrey was the first place player. Ty was second place. Michelle was voted out next. You are the ultimate predictor, and then you can live up to you being the ultimate Brain from Vanuatu, which is probably true. Let's be honest.
I don't know if Brain is the best way to pick somebody. It's just because I lean a lot into my brain. Also calculates my heart. Mm-hmm. It's part of the equation, which is really good to find out with Aubrey, who started out a brain.
Which is,
brain But she has really shown her heart, and I appreciate that.
And it's good you brought it up, because to close it out, Aubrey is really the only one we haven't talked about. You said she's your tip to win. I'm thinking that's probably likely at this point, but this is a big difference from the first Brains, Brawn, Beauty, where the first Brains tribe we saw they didn't have that ability to shut off just the brain bar. They didn't have the heart. They didn't have anything else. And Aubrey is kind of this player that's proving, well, the first Brains tribe, it wasn't just because they were brains. It's because they were only thinking, one-dimensionally in the game. And she really is, I guess, the brain that we've seen that's thought outside the box a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, I think so. Yeah, Aubrey. She's had to prove herself to me. I didn't start out, being a fan of hers, but I've come around a little bit. So, who do you think's going to win it?
I think it's between Aubrey and Sydney. If we're basing this on past seasons, I would say Sydney probably has a better chance just because we have seen more of the negatives of Aubrey. But if Aubrey ends up winning, I think that they've succeeded in rewriting what a winner's edit is and how they present the show. So I think I'd be happy either way.
Oh, but remember now, the negatives coming out of Aubrey, you see out of those. But that may not be back at camp.
Yeah. And I think the other thing with her negatives is that the negatives we saw were things pre-jury, like where she was crossing out the vote and then writing in a new name and, the arguments with Joe. Yeah, you're right. I mean, those are things that aren't necessarily going to play up to a jury.
Yes, and they may not be seen at camp. If Sydney is actually flipping her head and showing attitude back at camp and not working, everybody sees that.
Yeah.
So that's different from what you see on those private interviews. So we'll see.
Well, we will get your predictions for an upcoming season because I'm sure you'll be back on the show and we won't allow it to be the largest gap in between interviews ever. I'm interested now to hear from Ben to see who is the new longest gap, who is our fourth interview, because I think it went... Jillian was the very first one. The show actually started because of Reality Rally, and then I believe there was Michael Skupin and then you. So I'll have to find out who Ben... had as his fourth ever interview, and they can be our recapper next week or a little bit later on the season. But we'll definitely have you back on sooner than 4 years or whatever it's been since the last time we were on the show. And we thank you for coming on this week and being able to talk about Vanuatu with me, which is my second favorite season of all time.
Yay! Listen, Colin, just to you, you're a very good interviewer. It's good for you. You're doing what you're good at.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I think so too.
Hey, kiss that little baby extra tonight.
I will.
Okay.
I'll say this is from Scout, the ultimate brain of Vanuatu.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Colin. Have a nice evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.